Hello students, welcome you all for the next part of the social processes. In a previous lecture, we were discussed that social processes is of two types. The first one is associative and the second one is dissociative process. And we have already discussed the cooperation as a first associative process. So in this lecture, we are going to discuss the another two types of associative process, that is accommodation and assimilation. Adjustment is the way of life. It can take place in two ways, such as adaptation and accommodation. Adaptation refers to the process of biological adjustment, and accommodation, on the other hand, implies the process of social adjustment. Accommodation is the achievement of adjustment between people that permits harmonious acting together in a social situation. It is achieved by an individual through the acquisition of behavior pattern, habit, and the attitude which are transmitted to him socially. It is a process through which individual or group make adjustment to the changed situation to overcome difficulties faced by them. Sometimes new conditions and circumstances arises in the society. Individuals have learned to make adjustment to new situation. Thus, accommodation means adjusting oneself to the new environment. Now, there are the few definitions are available for the term accommodation. As Medwell and Page says, the term accommodation refers particularly to the process in which man attains sense of harmony with his environment. According to Horton and Hunt, accommodation is a process of developing temporary working agreements between conflicting individuals or a group. Actually, it is a termination of competing or conflicting relations between individual groups and other human relationship structure. It is a way of inventing social arrangement which enable people to work together whether they like it or not. This led Sumner to refer to accommodation as antagonistic cooperation. Characteristics of accommodation. The first one is it is the end result of conflict. The involvement of hostile individuals or a group in a conflict make them realize the importance of accommodation. Since conflict cannot take place continuously, they make room for accommodation. It is a natural result of conflict. If there were no conflict, there would be no need of accommodation. The second one, it is a both conscious and unconscious process. Accommodation is mainly an unconscious activity because a newborn individual accommodates himself with his family, caste, playgroup, school, and neighborhood or with the total environment unconsciously. Sometimes individual and group make deliberate and open attempt to stop fighting and start working together. The third one is it is a universal activity. Human society is composed of antagonistic elements and hence conflicts are inevitable. No society can function smoothly if the individuals and group are always engaged in conflict. The fourth characteristic is it is a continuous process. Throughout the life, one has to accommodate oneself with various situations. The continuity of the process of accommodation does not break at all. It is a continuous as men breathe. And the last characteristic is it is a mixture of both love and hate. The attitude of love makes people to cooperate with one another, but it is a hate which led them to create conflict and get involved in them and then to accommodate with one another. Accommodation or resolution of conflict may be brought about in many ways and accordingly may assume various forms or method of accommodation. The first one is admission of one's defeat. This method of accommodation is applicable between the conflicting party of unequal strength, which means the stronger group can pressurize a weaker group by its strength. For example, in a war, the victorious nation imposes its will on the vanquished and the war comes to close when the stronger party achieves a clear-cut victory over the other. The loser has to choose whether it will admit one's own defeat or continue the conflict with the risk of being eliminated together. The second one is compromise. This method is applicable when the combatants are of equal strength. In other words, it can be laid that this method is based on the principle of give and take. Both the combatants should make some concession or sacrifice voluntarily for each other because they know that the conflict could cause the sheer waste of their energy and resources. The third one is arbitration and conciliation. It can be achieved by the means of arbitration and conciliation, which involve attempt of the third party to resolve the conflict between the contending parties. For example, the conflict between the employer and the employee, husband and wife, two friends, labor and management are resolved through the intervention of arbitrator or a conciliator or a mediator. Here, there is a need to understand the difference between the arbitrator and the conciliator. The conciliator offers only suggestion in order to terminate a conflict. The acceptance of these suggestions is up to the discretion of the contending parties. It has no binding force upon them. Arbitration differs from conciliation in that the decision of arbitrator is binding on the parties concerned. The next method is toleration. Toleration is a method of accommodation in which there is no settlement of dispute, but there is only the avoidance of overt conflict or open conflict. For example, the coexistence of state with radically different economic and social systems such as communist and capitalist systems are the example of toleration. Similarly, at many places we find temple, churches, mosque, etc. standing in a close proximity to each other for centuries. After many years of religious conflict, this kind of religious tolerance has been possible. The next one is conversion. Conversion is a method of accommodation in which one of the contending parties try to convert his opponent to his view of point by proving them he is right and they are wrong. As a result, the party which has been convinced is likely to accept the viewpoint of the other party. For example, the conversion of large number of Hindu to Islam and Christianity was owing to their inability to tolerate the suffering of caste restriction in India. This method may also occur in politics, economics, and other fields. The last method of accommodation is rationalization. It is a method which involves the withdrawal of contending party from the conflict on the basis of some imaginary explanation to justify his action. In other words, it means an individual or a group rationalize has behavior by possible exercise and explanation. For example, the poor people attributes their poverty to the will of God. Sometimes when students believe that their failure in the examination is due to the defect in the evaluation of their answer script by examiner, they do not see the fact that their preparation for examination is quite inadequate. Importance of accommodation. Accommodation is a way which enable people to work together whether they like it or not. Society can hardly go on without accommodation. Since conflict disturb social integration, disturb social order and damage social stability, accommodation is essentially essential to check conflict and to maintain cooperation, which is a sine qua non of the social life. It is not only reduce or control conflict but also enable the individual and group to adjust themselves to change condition. It is the basis of the social organization. It, accommodation makes group life. It is indispensable in modern complex society. In accommodation, the barrier between the parties have been partially broken down, social distance weakened, and formal relationship established whereby group can work together. Thus, accommodation is essential for social harmony. It is close to cooperation and conflict, and thus must take trend on both field into consideration. The next associative social process is assimilation. Assimilation is a fundamental social process. It is that process by which individuals belonging to different culture are united into one. This implies a complete merging and fusion of two or more bodies into a single common body, like a process of analogous to digestions, in which we say that food is assimilated. Assimilation is a social relationship means that the cultural differences between divergent grouping of people disappear. Thus, they come to feel think, and act similarly as they observe new common tradition, attitude, and consequently take on a new cultural identity. We see the process operating among ethnic groups which enter a society with their own society culture. For example, American Indian adopt cultural element of white abdomining their own culture. But assimilation is not limited to this single field only. For example, husband and wives with dissimilar background often develop a surprising unity of interest and purpose. Basically, assimilation is a slow and gradual process. It takes quite some time before individual or groups once dissimilar become similar. That is why acculturation is the first step to assimilation. Actually, acculturation is the name given to the stage when the cultural group which is in contact with another borrows from it certain cultural element and incorporate them into its own culture. There are the few definitions available for the term assimilation, like as per the Binsach and Binsach, assimilation is a social process whereby individual or groups come to share the same sentiments and goals. Or as per the Onburn and Nimkov, assimilation is a process whereby individual or group once dissimilar become similar that become identified in interest and output. That is why we can say that assimilation is a process of interpretation and fusion in which individual and group acquire the attitude and value of other person or group, and by sharing their experiences and history are incorporated with them in a common cultural life. There are the few characteristics of assimilation. The first one is assimilation is an associative process. The second one is assimilation is a universal process. It is found in every place and at all times. Assimilation is a slow and gradual process. It is gradual as the individual comes to share the expectation of another group and slowly acquire a new set of values. The process cannot take place overnight. The fourth one is assimilation is a unconscious process. Individuals are not conscious that they discard their own values and acquire new set of values. Assimilation is a two-way process. It is based on the principle of give and take. Assimilation takes place when group of individuals borrow cultural element from each other and incorporate them to their own culture. Contact between two groups essentially affect both. Both the groups discard their cultural element and substitute them with new ones. Assimilation is a complex process. There are the certain factors which facilitate assimilation and other which hinder or retard it. The rate of assimilation depend upon whether facilitating or regarding factor predominate. Assimilation occur most readily when social contact are those of primary group, that is when they are intimate, personal and face to face. There are the following factors which are conducive for the assimilation. The first one is toleration. Tolerance helps people to come together to develop contact and to participate in common cultural and social activity. Close social contact is another leading factor which promote the process of assimilation in a greater way. When the people or a group different culture come into close proximity with each other, the assimilation process take place very easily. Like in India, the assimilation between Hinduism and Buddhism is possible due to the close social contact among the member of these two religious groups. The next factor which affect or which help the assimilation, that is a amalgamation. By amalgamation, we means that individual or group come into close contact to one another. It occur when two different cultural group establish matrimonial relationship among themselves. Equal economic opportunity also influence the assimilation process. The people or group having equal economic position become more easily intimated. Cultural similarity between two groups of individuals promote assimilation. If there are similarities between the cultural group, assimilation is quick to take place. Similarly, assimilation occurs most readily when two cultural groups have common language. Without knowledge of language, the individual remain outside the adopted society. The first step in assimilation into a new society is therefore to learn or to learn a language. Merely bringing persons of different background together does not assure that a fusion of culture and personality take place. Sometimes it results in conflicting rather than fusion between the contiguous group. There are the various factors that retard assimilation. These factors are: the first one is physical differences. Differences in features, complexion of skin, and other physical traits may also help or hinder in assimilation. Cultural differences like language and religion are usually considered to be the main constituent of culture. Immigrants having the same religion and language can easily adjust themselves in other area or country. Customs and beliefs are the other cultural characteristics who can aid or hinder assimilation. The third one is prejudice. Prejudice is a barrier to assimilation. Prejudice is the attitude on which segregation depends for its success. As long as a dominant group prejudice those who have been set apart, neither they as a group nor their individual members can easily become assimilated to the general culture. Prejudice also impedes assimilation between constituent elements within a given society. The fourth one is sense of superiority or inferiority. Assimilation is hindered by the feeling of superiority and inferiority. The people who have a strong feeling of superiority generally hate the people who suffer from the sense of inferiority. The last factor which hindered the assimilation, it is the isolation. People who live in isolation fail to establish social contact with other. The isolated people cut off entire social relationship with other people in society. Therefore, the process of assimilation become very difficult. In short, it can be summed up that assimilation is a slow process of adoption and adjustment on the part of individual. There is no abrupt change in the way of life. In short, assimilation is a process of cultural adoption and adjustment. Thank you so much for watching this video. In the next video, I am going to explain the another type of social processes, that is the dissociative process. Till then, stay healthy and safe. Goodbye.